28 out to the airport. Eisenhower inbound, heavy western into the burn, 30 in from Route 390, 18 in from Wolf, outbound just about a minute more because you're heavy from east all the way over to 1st Avenue. While Stevenson's finally cleared out, the Ryan inbound a little tight from 18th into the burn, 16 from 95th all the way into downtown. Skyway 57 to the Bishop Ford. Looking pretty good. Lakeshore Drive and your tollways checking in nice and light, and all the roads in or out of Northwest Indiana are nice and clear. That's traffic. I'm Jeremy Scott on AM 560. The Answer.
Chicago's Morning Answer continues next. Your official Chicagoland weather forecast from the 1 Hour Heating and Air Conditioning Weather Center. Cloudy with occasional rain this afternoon, high near 40. Currently 34. Next news at 9. Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
Listen to AM 560, The Answer, online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, on your Alexa-powered smart speaker, on TuneIn.
The other week, of course, tackled geopolitical matters, and one of the more celebrated guests in the gallery in terms of geopolitical importance and, to some extent, domestic political message sending, Juan Guaido, who is the opposition leader to Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela. Guaido in the gallery and recognized for the heroic fight they're putting up to try and end the socialist tyranny in Venezuela and restore that country to something approximating its previous greatness. Cliff May has written about that in the context of a return of the Monroe Doctrine. Is it the original Monroe Doctrine, I wonder, or maybe the sort of reinterpretation of the Monroe Doctrine to mean multilateralism? Not the old Monroe Doctrine, the original Monroe Doctrine about spheres of influence. But we'll get that distillation from Cliff May, president of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies right now. Cliff, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Always good to be with you guys.
So the Monroe Doctrine as updated in the 30s under FDR, the idea that multilateralism is the order of the day, non-intervention and multilateralism?
Yeah, I mean, it began in 1823. James Monroe, he was saying to the Europeans, no more imperialism, no more colonialism in the Americas. We don't want you here for that. We don't want you taking over other countries in the Western Hemisphere. Stay out of there. Very important. And a few years ago, John Kerry said the Monroe Doctrine is dead. I think what he meant to say is the U.S. doesn't want to be dominating the Latin American countries. That we're not going to try to do that. But the problem is that somebody like Vladimir Putin hears the Monroe Doctrine is dead. He thinks, well, fine, then I want to be involved in Latin America. And Russia, and before that the Soviet Union, of course, was involved throughout in Latin America with Cuba, and then Cuba, of course, and other countries as well. And the problem right now is that you have Venezuela, a country that should be one of the richest countries in the world. It has more oil than anybody, including Saudi Arabia. 90% of the people are in abject poverty. Hundreds of thousands of people, perhaps millions, have fled to other countries, burdening their economies, Colombia and other places, because they just can't live in Venezuela anymore. And reform and change has been impossible there, largely because of Russian and Cuban influence in that country. You've got Russians and Cubans in the military, in the intelligence. They're guarding Nicolas Maduro, who we do not recognize as the rightful leader of that country. We see him as a dictator. And it's been impossible to get anything done there. And Russia and Cuba are the main reasons for that. There are not helpful also, certainly Islamic Republic of Iran and Hezbollah, its proxy, working hand in glove with drug cartels, working in criminal enterprises in Venezuela. And what you're seeing here is the current administration, the Trump administration, very much trying to take on Russia and Cuba. Hasn't done so successfully yet, but that's what's on their agenda.
But, I mean, it really is sort of the neo version of the Monroe Doctrine because, of course, the original Monroe Doctrine in 1823 also called for American restraint when it came to Europe's colonies as well as the internal workings of these European countries. And I don't know that we've exactly abided that in the way that James Monroe conceived it. So this. I mean, I see I get what you're saying about pushing Russia and Iran out of our hemisphere, but it seems to me it's much more about the sort of principled realist approach of the Trump administration generally is about non-intervention and where possible, like in Venezuela, as he mentioned and as you wrote about in the State of the Union speech, multilateralism.
Yeah, I might quibble with you about the multilateralism. I'm not sure that Trump
where
is very
possible,
proud
where possible.
that he's got dozens of countries, more than 60 countries, I believe it is, that now recognize Juan Guaido as the president of Venezuela, not Nicolas Maduro. But there's also a block of countries, again led by Russia, Cuba, China, Iran, North Korea, who say, no, we still consider Maduro president, and we're going to do everything we can to keep him in power. And again, it is a extraordinarily corrupt administration that Maduro runs, and one where you have among the things they've been doing is the Venezuelan government gives fake passports to Iranian agents who then come into the United States on these fake passports, and we don't know what they're doing here. If they work for Hezbollah, they are probably putting together terrorist cells, sleeper cells that will be activated at some point.
Were you surprised when Nancy Pelosi and some on the left stood up and gave Juan Guaido a standing ovation?
This is what I thought was interesting. There was, as you and I wrote about it in my column for the Washington Times, this was not obviously a bipartisan occasion, the State of the Union speech. Nancy Pelosi, you saw, was scowling. She was angry at the end. She ripped up his speech. Yeah. But for Juan Guaido, she stood up twice and applauded and smiled, and many other Democrats did. And what I wondered at that point was, I don't see Bernie Sanders. I wonder if he's there. So I checked and found out that he was not at the State of the Union. Oh. He was up in New Hampshire. He was with supporters. He was watching on TV. The thing of it is that he has not been willing to say that he thinks Maduro is a dictator who should step down. He has spoken in the past in a complimentary fashion toward Hugo Chavez. That was the predecessor of Maduro. He was 11 years in office. He was a Marxist, very close to Cuba. He died in office of cancer, and Maduro was his hand-picked successor after Chavez died in 2013. And what happened in 2016 was there was another election. It was considered neither free nor fair. Maduro took office. The legislature of Venezuela said we don't recognize him as a president, and they recognized instead a member of the legislature, Juan Guaido. So it's a question Bernie should be asked. We know that he spent his honeymoon in the Soviet Union. We know he's had praise for Castro, had praise for Chavez, has been unclear on Maduro, seems to support him, but has been cagey about it. It's a split within the Democratic Party between those who are far left and those who are more moderate.
Well, yeah, it's not just Bernie that needs to be asked. The Chicago Teachers Union needs to be asked, and teachers' unions around this country, generally speaking, since they're such big political players. Also, too, Ann Applebaum had this riff from The Atlantic, had this riff about Maduro and making this ridiculous insinuation after Trump fired Vindman Brothers and Sondland, essentially. There's this smacks of authoritarianism, the hysterics of the left, and it completely ignores that our press corps was in the tank for Maduro and Chavez before, talking about the glorious economic miracle happening in Venezuela right up until the bottom fell out. And you had Hugo Chavez posthumously receive a National Journalism Award in Venezuela, in Caracas, for what he did to platform and digital media, the small d democratization of digital media. He received so Applebaum is making the mistake, as so often is made, that somehow Maduro or Chavez rises without complicity from these intrepid journalists in the press corps. And there are some, certainly, including in Venezuela, but there are a lot who fall in with the regime and the other leaders of civic institutions in society. You don't get a totalitarian regime without buy-in from all of these members of the vanguard class that the left in this country likes to talk about as the bulwark against such authoritarianism. In many cases, they're sort of the final speed bump that a dictator needs to get over, and usually does, because they're fellow travelers philosophically.
No, Venezuela is such a clear example. This country was at one point reasonably democratic. It was at one point on the road to becoming wealthy, should be wealthy by all standards, has these huge natural resources, and only because of socialism, totalitarianism, and exploitation, real exploitation by the Russians and the Cubans and others, does it find itself in the current situation. Good sources I have say the Russians are managing to control about 70% of the oil production and sales out of that country, and skimming about $2 billion a year off of that, at a time when literally people are walking across the border because they can't get food, they can't get toilet paper, they can't get the most basic necessities of life in their supermarkets. There is a small class of elites that say above this, but they're largely corrupt elites are working hand in glove with narco traffickers and with Hezbollah, which, again, is an Iranian proxy that in Venezuela and elsewhere in Latin America is colluding actively with the narco trafficking cartels. When I say colluding, they say to each other, well, I can do money laundering for you. Can you get me weapons? I can get you weapons. How about smuggling drugs into the U.S.? We can do that. And this is really a frightening concept, this idea of international terrorists and international narco criminals working hand in glove.
He is Cliff Mays, the president of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, and check out his piece, which I'll tweet out, The Return of the Monroe Doctrine. Cliff, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Dan and Amy are talking about it. It's Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Signature Bank is Chicago's fastest growing independently owned business bank. It's a bank where relationships still matter. Signature Bank knows your name and your story. I'm Dan Proft, and I know this because Signature Bank is my business bank.
Hey all, this is Jim Carr, co-host of the #1 rated manufacturing podcast, Making Chips, and a customer of Signature Bank. If you're a crazy busy company owner like me, you know that success in business is all about relationships. While many banks call themselves a relationship bank, Signature knows how to do it right. They made the banking relationship easy and on my timeline. Their technology, coupled with the attention from my personal banker, made the transaction as effortless and seamless as possible. Much thanks to Signature Bank for supporting Car Machine and Tool when we needed it most. Bam.
Signature Bank is looking for their next success story. To learn more about turning your business vision into